Apocalypse is Stellaris' fourth DLC and second expansion pack DLC, which focuses mostly on additions to combat with things like the new Titan class and the long-awaited addition of Planet Killers. But is it enough to justify the $20 price tag? Starting off, we get the addition of Titans, which are an all-new class of ships above battleships. They're incredibly large ships with enormous bonuses. They even have a special type of weapon that fires very slowly but one-shots battleship. They also get a utility slot, which is very unique. You get basically either a buff or a debuff depending on what you choose, and you can either make your ship stronger or make the enemy ships weaker, and they're also limited to a set amount based on your naval capacity, so they function much more as flagships, where you'll have like one per fleet or something like that. I gotta say, while Titans are a really cool and interesting addition, and they certainly add something to work towards in the late game, which I really like, they flesh that aspect out more, you don't see them very much because they take so long to get to, and you have to burn down so much of the tech tree just to get them. And then they cost an enormous amount, and you also need specialized modules at a shipyard to produce them. It just takes forever, and by the time you really get them, you've probably already won the game, or you're in the process of defeating an enemy pretty heavily. Planet Killers are another major addition with Apocalypse. Much like Titans, though, they're pushed to the entire late game, so you won't really use them at all until you've either won the game or you're snowballing pretty hardcore. Now, Planet Killers require a ton of tech and even an Ascension perk. You can't pick them until you've had at least 3 other Ascension perks, and then you can pick the Colossus Project perk, which then allows you to research the Colossus project so that you can start building Titans. So it takes a very, very long time to get there. Probably the coolest thing about the Planet Killers is that there's a lot of variety with them. You can get a planet killing one that's just like your Death Star. You blow the planet up, then you've got a bunch of asteroids you can mine. You've got one where you can shield a planet. There's a spiritualist one, which is kind of like a god ray thing. It's pretty cool. There's a lot of just diversity for every type of empire to pick. Now, one of the kind of interesting things is that there's a charge up time for the Planet Killers, so you can try and have an epic Luke Skywalker style Star Wars moment where you send your fleet in trying to destroy the Death Star basically before it can fire. Now, overall, Planet Killers are pretty cool and something I've always wanted for a long time, so I'm happy to see them, but I do wish the visuals were just a little bit better, particularly the one where you blow up the planet is just a little bit bland. The actual pieces of the planet just kind of drift apart in a kind of bland way. And then there's Marauders, which function basically as pirate mercenaries. Now, you can do a couple different things with Marauders. You can hire generals and admirals from them, which will give you really powerful generals and admirals for your fleets and your armies. You can also hire their services to attack an enemy, though it is a bit inconsistent as to whether or not it actually does damage to the AI. You can also purchase a small fleet from them for a brief period of time with credits, so you can buy an army out of thin air basically to defend yourself, which gives you an interesting way to defend yourself if you're playing more of a really macro style and you just need a quick fleet that you can defeat an enemy with. And then there's the Great Khan Crisis, which happens when one of the Marauder factions blows up with the Great Khan taking power. Basically goes around subjugating different empires to be under his rule. It is slightly different, which I do like, than some of the other crises. It is the same thing though still. There's basically these giant fleets that just pop out of thin air and start conquering everything, and God help you if you happen to spawn right next to the Marauders and this happens, because you're basically just screwed and you more or less just have to give up because it's almost impossible to defend yourself against some of these onslaughts. It's basically just a giant waiting game because you get subjugated by the Great Khan, then you just basically wait it out a period of time, then eventually he will die, and then you can go around as your normal empire doing what you do independently. Now, overall, I just don't think this crisis is really that exciting or interesting, and it doesn't really shake up the galactic map like I was really hoping. And honestly, I'm kind of getting a little bit tired of these crises that are just infinite fleets spawn out of thin air and start conquering everything. And then there's the ion cannon, which is a kind of interesting idea. It's basically a giant defensive platform you can build that will one-shot battleships. So it has a really long cooldown, and it can also shoot across solar systems. So it'll fire even before the battle begins, which is really interesting. But because the cooldown is so long and it really doesn't get to do a whole lot during the actual battle as a result, it's kind of just a waste of money and really not that useful. And then you get 2 new music tracks, one of which has been playing during this review, and they're interesting, but they kind of feel like remixes in some way of previous songs. They have very similar styles, but I did like them for the most part. Now, overall, is Apocalypse worth your money? I don't really think so. You don't really get a whole lot of value here. Titans aren't really used that much, ion cannons aren't really used that much. Planet Killers are cool the first time you really use them, but they're so sparingly used and they basically only come into the ultra late game when you've pretty much won the game that it's kind of pointless. You're basically paying $20 for a pretty crisis and not a whole lot else. You've got Marauders, which are interesting at times, but really it's just a slight way for you to kind of get a quick army here or there. It's just not really a new and interesting, engaging feature at all. Now, overall, Apocalypse gets a 6 out of 10. It's definitely really far down when it comes to the list of must-buy DLCs for Stellaris.